Instructor had seen many things in his 60 years of teaching at the Galactic Freight Academy. He had trained students with 6 legs, students with no legs at all, students who floated through the air, and students whose bodies were made of living crystal. He had taught beings who could lift twice their body weight and beings who needed mechanical suits just to move the cargo containers. In all those years, across all those species, he had never lost a single student to a preventable injury. He was proud of this record. It defined him as an instructor. The secret to his success was simple. Every species had limits and had spent decades learning exactly what those limits were. The with their 6 powerful legs could pull heavy loads but tired quickly. The could manipulate objects with their energy fields but needed frequent rest periods. They had incredible strength in their armored bodies but moved slowly and carefully. Knew all of this. He knew how much weight each species could safely lift, how long they could work before fatigue set in, and exactly when to call for a break before someone got hurt. His first rule, the one he repeated at the start of every single class, was sacred. "Lift only what you're able," he would say, holding up all 4 of his arms for emphasis. "Know your limits. Respect your limits. Your limits keep you alive." When received the notification that a human had enrolled in the Freight Handler program, he immediately pulled up the species file. He always did this with new species, though in recent years, new species had become rare. The Academy had been around for 3 centuries. Most species in the galactic community had already sent students through the program. Humans were different. They were new to the community, having only made first contact 7 standard years ago. The species file was marked with several warning tags. Read through it carefully, his concern growing with each line. Humans were classified as Class 4. The term, always made uncomfortable. It referred to species that evolved on planets the rest of the galaxy considered extremely dangerous. High gravity, dangerous atmosphere, aggressive predators, toxic plants, extreme weather. Planets where, by all reasonable standards, complex life should not have developed at all. Yet somehow, these species not only survived but thrived in conditions that would kill most galactic citizens within hours. The human, designated as Earth in their language, had a gravity rating of 1.3 times galactic standard. Their atmosphere contained oxygen at concentrations that most species found mildly toxic. Their planet had extreme temperature variations, violent storms, and a bewildering variety of creatures that could kill through venom, crushing force, or diseased bites. Humans had evolved as persistence predators, which meant they chased their prey over long distances until the prey literally died of exhaustion. Read this last detail twice. He tried to imagine what kind of mindset that evolutionary history would create. What did it do to a species when their primary hunting strategy was to simply refuse to stop, when their greatest advantage was an unwillingness to give up? The physical specifications concerned him too. Humans had dense muscle tissue and a skeletal structure reinforced to handle their high-gravity world. They had remarkable endurance and could regulate their body temperature through a water-based cooling system that allowed them to work in conditions that would cause heat exhaustion in most species. Their pain tolerance was listed as significantly above average, which was a polite way of saying they could ignore injuries that would incapacitate others. But it was the psychological profile that worried most. The file noted that humans had a non-standard relationship with risk assessment and a cultural tendency to test boundaries. They were, according to the report, inclined to determine their own limitations through trial rather than accept established guidelines. Closed the file and sat quietly for a moment. He thought about his perfect safety record. He thought about his first rule. Then he began preparing additional safety briefings for his new student. Arrived on station 3 days before classes began. Watched him walk into the orientation hall with the other new students. The human was shorter than had expected, standing only about 1.7 standard units tall. He had dark hair and darker eyes, and he moved with an easy confidence that reminded of a warrior, though without this heavy armor plating. Smiled at the other students and took a seat near the front. He appeared friendly and relaxed, tried not to let the species file color his judgment. Just because humans were didn't mean this particular human would be a problem. Perhaps would be cautious and careful. Perhaps he would be the exception. The orientation began. Gave his standard welcome speech, explaining the history of the Academy and the importance of proper freight handling techniques throughout the galaxy. Trade was the lifeblood of the galactic community. Every shipment that moved between worlds required trained handlers who understood both the technical and safety aspects of the work. The Academy's graduates worked on space stations, planetary docks, and ships throughout known space. They were, said with genuine pride, the people who kept civilization running. Then came the safety briefing. This was the most important part of orientation and had refined his presentation over decades. He brought up holographic displays showing proper lifting techniques, team coordination protocols, and rest cycle requirements. He explained how the cargo bay used color-coded weight modules to ensure students worked with appropriate loads. Green modules, he said, gesturing to a stack of containers in the demonstration area, weigh 50 standard units. These are suitable for most species and will be your primary training tools. The yellow modules weigh 100 standard units. You will work up to these with proper conditioning and always with a partner. The red modules weigh 200 standard units and require either team lifting or exoskeleton assistance. You will not handle red modules alone under any circumstances. The students nodded. In the back raised one of her legs to indicate a question. What about emergency situations? What if we must move something too heavy? You call for help, said firmly. You always call for help. There is no cargo so important that it is worth an injury. There is no emergency so urgent that it requires you to exceed your limits. He paused and looked at each student in turn. Which brings me to my first rule, the rule that is more important than any other. Lift only what you're able. Know your limits. Respect your limits. Your limits keep you alive. Raised his hand, nodded at him, curious to hear what the human would ask. Would it be about the emergency protocols, the weight classifications, the rest requirements? Instructor said, his voice polite and genuinely curious. When you say lift only what I'm able to lift, do you mean what you think I'm able to lift, or what I know I can lift? The room went quiet. The other students looked confused, felt something cold settle in his chest. It was such a simple question, asked in such a straightforward way, yet somehow it felt dangerous. I'm not sure I understand the distinction, said carefully. Leaned forward slightly. Well, you've set these weight categories based on galactic standards, right? Based on what most species can handle safely. But you don't know exactly what I can handle because you've never worked with a human before. So when you say I should only lift what I'm able to lift, are you asking me to follow your guidelines based on what you think is safe? Or are you asking me to use my own judgment based on what I actually know I can do? Wanted to say that there was no difference, that the guidelines existed precisely because they were based on careful study and represented what was actually safe. But he found himself hesitating. The human had a point. The guidelines were based on averages across many species. They were designed to be conservative, to err on the side of caution. For some individuals, the limits might indeed be lower than their actual capabilities. The guidelines exist to protect you, finally said. They represent safe working loads for your first training period. As you progress through the program, we will assess your individual capabilities and adjust accordingly. But for now, I need you to follow the standard protocols. Start with green modules. Work your way up gradually. Lift only what feels comfortable. Nodded slowly. Okay, so you want me to lift what feels comfortable to me. I can do that. Something about the way he said it made uneasy, but the human seemed to be agreeing, so moved on with the orientation. He explained the schedule, the facilities, the evaluation criteria. He introduced the teaching assistants and showed the students where the medical bay was located. Everything proceeded normally. After the orientation, dismissed the students to familiarize themselves with the training bay. They would begin actual classes the next day, but he wanted them to see the space, to get comfortable with the environment. The students filed out of the hall and made their way to the large cargo bay that served as the primary training facility. Followed at a distance, watching as the students explored. They clustered together, examining the green modules with their legs, testing the weight carefully. They floated around the upper levels, discussing the ceiling-mounted crane systems. The two students stood near the yellow modules, not touching them yet, just observing with their careful, methodical approach. Walked directly to the red modules. Felt his breath catch. He started forward, ready to call out a warning, but he wanted to see what the human would do, would examine them, ask questions about them. Surely he wouldn't try to lift one. Had just explained that red modules required team assistance or mechanical support. Bent down, wrapping his arms around one of the red containers. His legs tensed. Then, with a grunt of effort that echoed through the bay, he stood up. The 200-unit container rose with him, adjusted his grip, then lifted the container over his head in a smooth, controlled motion. He held it there for a moment, arms extended, breathing hard but steady. Then he lowered it back to the ground with the same control he had shown lifting it. Every student in the bay had stopped moving. They stared at with expressions ranging from shock to confusion to something that might have been fear. The human looked around, noticed everyone watching, and gave an apologetic smile. "Sorry," he said. "I just wanted to see what comfortable felt like. That was comfortable. Heavy but comfortable. I could probably carry it across the bay if I needed to." Stood frozen. In 60 years of teaching, nothing had prepared him for this moment. The human hadn't been showing off. He hadn't been testing the rules or trying to impress anyone. He had simply, genuinely done what it asked. He had lifted what felt comfortable to him. The problem was that comfortable for a human apparently meant something very different than it did for anyone else. The next morning, arrived at the training bay early. He had spent most of the night reviewing the human species file again, trying to understand what he was dealing with. The more he read, the more concerned he became. This wasn't just about strength. It was about a fundamental difference in how humans perceived physical exertion. Most species in the galaxy had evolved on relatively forgiving worlds. When their bodies sent pain signals, those signals meant stop. When they felt tired, rest was necessary. When something felt heavy, it was because they were approaching their safe limit. Evolution had given them internal warning systems that were, generally speaking, accurate and trustworthy. Humans had evolved under different pressures. Their warning systems had been calibrated for a world where stopping meant death, where predators didn't care if you were tired, where finding food required traveling distances that would seem impossible to other species. Their pain signals weren't commands to stop, they were just information to be considered. Their exhaustion wasn't an endpoint, it was a challenge to be pushed through. Arrived with the other students right on time. He looked well-rested and cheerful. He greeted politely and waited for instructions along with everyone else. Nothing about his demeanor suggested he understood that he had done anything unusual the previous day. Decided to address the situation directly. Before beginning the formal lesson, he asked to stay after while the other students started their warm-up exercises under the teaching assistant's supervision. Once they were alone, led the human to a quiet corner of the bay. He began carefully. "Yesterday you lifted a red module. Do you understand why that concerns me?" "Because you said they required team assistance or mechanical support," replied immediately. "I know I went against the protocol. I'm sorry about that. I should have asked first. I was just curious about the weight classification system, and I wanted to get a feel for what the upper ranges were like." "You lifted 200 standard units," said, "over your head, on your first day, without any warm-up or preparation." Nodded. "Right. It was a good weight. I could feel the burn in my shoulders and core, but I had it under control. I probably wouldn't want to do too many repetitions at that weight without building up to it, but for a single lift, it was manageable. Tried to find the right words. Most species in this program will never lift that much weight alone. Some of them will never lift that much even with a partner. The red modules are designed to be the absolute upper limit of what's possible without mechanical assistance. For most species, said, he wasn't being argumentative, he was simply stating a fact. But I'm human, we're built different, our gravity is higher, our muscle density is different. What's an extreme weight for most people is just heavy for me. This was exactly what I'd feared. The human wasn't being reckless. He genuinely didn't understand that the galactic standards weren't meant to be surpassed. They were meant to represent the maximum safe limit. The fact that could exceed them didn't mean he should. Tell me about freight handling on Earth, said, changing his approach. How do your people train for this kind of work? Seemed happy to discuss this. Well, it varies by location and company, but generally we start with basic safety training. Proper lifting techniques, team coordination, that sort of thing. Then there's usually a conditioning period where you build up your strength and endurance. A lot of handlers will do additional training outside of work hours too. Weight lifting, cardio, core exercises. Wait, interrupted. You do additional training outside of work. Sure, said, as if this was obvious. You have to maintain your conditioning or you'll lose it. Plus, if you can get stronger, you become more efficient at the job. It's pretty common for handlers to spend a few hours a week in the gym. Felt a headache forming behind his eyes. So you work a full shift handling cargo, and then you go and deliberately strain your muscles further. I mean, we don't do heavy lifting after a hard shift, explained. That would be asking for an injury. But yeah, regular strength training is pretty standard. Otherwise, you plateau. Plateau, repeated. The word felt foreign in this context. In all his years of teaching, no student had ever expressed concern about plateauing. They learned the job, they mastered the techniques, and they maintained their skills. The idea of constantly trying to increase one's capabilities seemed not just unnecessary but potentially dangerous. How much do freight handlers lift on Earth? Asked. What's considered normal? Thought about it. Depends on the job, but most handlers regularly move containers in the 50 to 100 kilogram range. That's solo, without mechanical assistance. With a partner or a basic hand truck, you might handle up to 200 or 300 kilos. For really heavy stuff, we use forklifts or cranes, obviously. Did the conversion in his head. 50 to 100 kilograms was roughly 50 to 100 standard units. Was describing as normal what the Academy considered to be the working range from beginner to advanced level. And humans did this regularly, day after day, as their standard job. What about shift length? Asked. How long do your handlers work? Usually 8 to 12 hours, said. Depends on the operation. Some ports run longer shifts during busy seasons. 8 to 12 hours. The Academy's training schedule was based on 4-hour practical sessions with mandatory rest breaks. Had designed this schedule based on careful research into optimal learning conditions and fatigue management across multiple species. The idea that humans routinely worked 3 times that long made him feel like his entire understanding of physical labor was incomplete. And rest breaks? Asked, though he almost didn't want to know the answer. Legally mandated in most places, said. Usually 15 minutes every 2 hours plus a longer break for a meal. Though in practice, it depends on the job. If you're in the middle of loading a ship, you don't really stop until it's done. Was quiet for a long moment. Everything was describing represented what the Academy would consider dangerous overwork. Yet humans apparently did this as a matter of course. It wasn't that they were being exploited or forced into unsafe conditions. This was simply how they worked. Said slowly, I need you to understand something. The protocols we teach here are not suggestions. They are not conservative estimates that you're expected to exceed. They are the actual limits that keep our students safe. When I say lift only what you're able, I mean lift only what you can handle without risk of injury. I understand, said. I really do, and I'm not trying to be difficult or ignore the rules, but here's the thing, instructor. On Earth, I load cargo ships. I've been doing it for 5 years. I know what my body can handle. I know the difference between a weight that challenges me and a weight that might hurt me. When I lifted that red module yesterday, I wasn't anywhere near my actual limit. I was being careful. And there it was, the fundamental disconnect, had been being careful. By human standards, he had been exercising appropriate caution. The problem was that human standards and galactic standards existed in completely different categories. Made a decision. For the remainder of this program, I need you to follow the standard protocols exactly. I don't care if they feel too conservative to you. I don't care if you're capable of more. You will start with green modules. You will work up to yellow modules only when I approve it. You will take all mandatory rest breaks. You will not train outside of class hours. Can you agree to this? Hesitated, could see the conflict in his expression. The human clearly thought these restrictions were unnecessary, but finally nodded. Yes, instructor, I can do that. I'll follow your protocols. Thank you, said. He felt a small sense of relief, though he suspected this was only the beginning of his challenges with this student. They rejoined the class and began the formal first lesson. He started with the basics: proper stance, grip technique, core engagement, breathing patterns. These were fundamentals that every handler needed to master regardless of species. The students practiced with empty containers first, getting used to the movements without any weight at all. Followed along perfectly. His form was good, his attention focused. He asked appropriate questions and helped other students when they struggled with a technique. For a while, allowed himself to hope that perhaps the human would fit into the program without further incident. Then came the first practical exercise. Students were to move green modules from one side of the bay to the other, using proper lifting and carrying techniques. It was a simple drill, designed to last about an hour with appropriate rest breaks built in. Demonstrated the proper method. Approach the module, test the weight with a partial lift, commit to the full lift, carry it at waist height using your legs and core, set it down gently, rest for a moment, then move to the next one. The goal was smooth, controlled movements with good form. Speed was not a factor. The students began. They worked methodically, their 6 legs providing excellent stability. They used their energy fields to guide the modules along, moving slowly but steadily. The students worked in pairs, communicating constantly to maintain coordination. Picked up his first green module and carried it across the bay. He set it down, turned around, and went back for another. No rest. He picked up the second module and carried it across. Then a third. Then a fourth. Called out, rest break. Paused, I'm not tired yet, instructor. The protocol requires a rest break after every 3 modules, said patiently. Right, sorry. Set down the module he was carrying and stood still for the required 30 seconds. Then he immediately picked up where he left off. Watched the human work. His form remained perfect throughout. His breathing stayed steady. There were no signs of strain or fatigue. When the other students began to slow down, taking longer rests and moving more carefully, maintained the same pace he had started with. After 45 minutes, called for a general rest period. The other students gratefully stopped working and found places to sit or lie down. Stopped too, but instead of resting, he started doing something had never seen in a freight handling class. The human got down on the floor and began pushing himself up and down using just his arms. Up, down, in a steady rhythm. After about 20 repetitions, he flipped over and started doing some kind of core exercise, pulling his knees toward his chest and then extending his legs. Said, walking over, what are you doing? Maintenance exercises, explained, not stopping his movements. Just keeping the blood flowing and the muscles engaged. If I just stand still during breaks, I get stiff. You're supposed to be resting. This is resting, said. It's active recovery, light movement between heavy work sessions. It's actually better for you than just sitting still. Had to physically stop himself from saying something he would regret. The human wasn't being defiant. He genuinely believed that doing additional exercises during rest breaks constituted light movement and recovery. Stand up, said firmly. Come with me. He led out of the training bay and into his office. Once inside, he gestured for the human to sit, did so, looking confused but not worried. I need to understand something, began. Do you think the protocols I've established are inadequate? No, instructor, said immediately. They seem well thought out and thorough. Then why aren't you following them? Blinked. I am following them. I've been lifting only green modules, using proper form, taking rest breaks when you call for them. You've been exercising during your rest breaks. Light movement, corrected. I wasn't doing anything strenuous. Took a deep breath. On most worlds in the galaxy, what you were doing would be considered strenuous. What you consider light movement is what other species consider a workout. This seemed to genuinely surprise, really, but I wasn't breathing hard or anything. My heart rate barely elevated. Yes, said. Because you're a human from a high gravity with unusual endurance capabilities. But I need you to understand that this academy is not designed around human capabilities. It's designed around galactic norms. And by those norms, you are pushing far beyond what's considered safe. Was quiet for a moment, processing this. When he spoke again, his voice was more subdued. I'm sorry, instructor. I really am trying to follow the rules. It's just hard to recalibrate what counts as effort. On Earth, the kind of work we're doing today would be considered a warm-up. I understand, said, and he did. The problem wasn't that was being difficult. The problem was that the human's baseline was so different from everyone else's that he literally couldn't tell when he was exceeding normal limits. But I need you to try. I need you to follow not just the letter of the protocols, but the spirit of them. When I call a rest break, you rest. You sit or stand still. No exercises, no movement, just rest. Even if I don't feel tired. Even if you don't feel tired. Nodded slowly. Okay, I can do that. It's going to feel weird, but I can do it. They returned to the training bay and the lesson continued. Followed the protocols exactly as instructed. When rest breaks were called, he stood perfectly still, even though could see the restless energy in him. When the other students began to show fatigue and slow down, maintained his pace but didn't exceed the speed of his classmates. He was, had to admit, trying very hard to fit in. But trying hard didn't change the fundamental reality. Wasn't like the other students. His capabilities were so far beyond the galactic norm that even his restrained efforts looked superhuman. The other students had begun to notice. They watched him with a mixture of awe and unease. Some started to whisper among themselves. After class, one of the students approached. Instructor, she said quietly, is it safe to train alongside the human? He's so much stronger than the rest of us. What if there's an accident? It was a fair question and didn't have a good answer. Hadn't done anything to endanger anyone else. He was careful and controlled, but his mere presence was disrupting the class dynamic. The other students were measuring themselves against him and finding themselves wanting, even though they were all performing exactly as expected for their species. Spent that evening writing a report to the Academy board. He detailed the situation with, explaining both the human's capabilities and his attitude, was respectful, willing to learn, and genuinely trying to follow the rules. But his natural abilities were creating problems that didn't know how to solve. The Academy's protocols were built on galactic norms. They represented decades of research and experience across hundreds of species. They worked. But they worked because they assumed certain baseline capabilities. What did you do when a student came along whose baseline was so different that the entire framework didn't apply? The board's response came the next morning. They acknowledged concerns, but noted that the Academy had a responsibility to train all species seeking certification. Humans were members of the galactic community now. They couldn't be excluded from standard programs simply because they were different. The board suggested that continue with the class as planned and document any issues that arose. They would review the situation at the midpoint of the term. It was, thought, a careful way of saying they had no idea what to do either. 3 weeks into the term, his carefully structured curriculum was showing cracks. The problem wasn't performance in class. The human followed every instruction precisely. He worked with green modules even though suspected he could juggle them. He took rest breaks even when he clearly didn't need them. He maintained perfect form and helped other students without being asked. The problem was everything else. Had established a rule, no training outside of class hours, had agreed to this rule, but apparently his definition of training was very specific. One evening found the human in the station's recreation area, running. Not jogging gently. Running hard, sweat pouring down his face, breathing heavily, pushing himself through what was clearly a challenging workout. Said exasperated, "What are you doing?" Slowed to a stop, breathing hard. "Cardio," he said between breaths, "just maintaining my base fitness." "This is training. We agreed no training outside of class." "This isn't training," protested. "Training would be practicing freight handling techniques or doing specific strength work. This is just exercise, general fitness maintenance. I'm not working on any skills related to the class." Wanted to argue, but he realized the human honestly saw a distinction. For training meant job-specific skills practice. Everything else was just normal life maintenance, no different than eating or sleeping. "How often do you do this?" asked. "Every day," said. "Sometimes twice a day if I have the time. Running in the morning, strength work in the evening." "Every day," repeated, "while taking a full course load at the academy." "Well, yeah," said, as if this were obvious. "If I didn't exercise regularly, I'd feel awful, sluggish and tired. The classwork isn't really enough to maintain my fitness." And there it was again. The classwork that was pushing some students to their limits wasn't even enough exercise for. The human needed additional strenuous activity just to feel normal. Let it go. He couldn't police what did in his free time, and at least the human wasn't practicing freight handling techniques. But the incident highlighted a growing concern. Wasn't trying to exceed the protocols. He was simply living his normal life, and his normal life made everyone else look sedentary by comparison. The real crisis came during week 4, during an endurance training session. The lesson was designed to simulate a long shift on a busy dock. Students would move yellow modules continuously for 2 hours, with the standard rest breaks. It was meant to be challenging, pushing students to work through mild fatigue while maintaining good form and safety awareness. Paired students strategically. 2 students per yellow module working together, communicating constantly. He paired with one of the students, was strong and methodical, one of the best students in the class. Hoped that pairing him with would work well. The exercise began and moved their first module smoothly. They communicated well, their movements coordinated. Felt a moment of relief. Maybe this would work after all. But as the session progressed, problems emerged. Not because was struggling, but because he wasn't. The yellow modules, designed to be challenging even for pairs, didn't seem to tire the human at all. Maintained the same pace for the entire 2 hours, never slowing, never showing signs of fatigue. Meanwhile, was clearly working hard, his breathing heavy, his movements becoming slightly less precise as tiredness set in. After 1 hour, asked for an extra rest break, approved it immediately. Rest breaks were always granted when requested, but during the break spoke quietly too. "Instructor, I'm not sure I can continue with the same partner. The human. He's not tired at all. I feel like I'm slowing him down. It's affecting my concentration." Reassigned partners for the 2nd hour. He paired with one of the, hopping a different body structure might create better balance. But the same problem emerged. They began to struggle while remained fresh. After class, several students approached with similar concerns. They felt inadequate working alongside. They knew intellectually that different species had different capabilities, but seeing the difference so clearly was demoralizing. One student asked if perhaps might be better suited to an advanced class. That evening, did something he had never done before. He called to his office for a conversation that had nothing to do with rule violations or protocol concerns. He began, "I want to talk to you about how you're affecting the other students." The human looked surprised. "Have I done something wrong? Did I offend someone?" "No, nothing like that. You've been perfectly respectful, but your presence in the class is creating problems I didn't anticipate. The other students are starting to feel inadequate. They see what you can do, and it makes them question their own abilities." Frowned, clearly troubled by this. "I'm not trying to show off or make anyone feel bad. I've been following all the protocols exactly as you asked." "I know," said, "and that's part of the problem. You're following the protocols, but even when you do, you make tasks that are meant to be challenging look easy. It's not your fault. It's simply who you are, but it's affecting the class dynamic." Was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Back on Earth, I worked with all kinds of people. Some were stronger than me, some weaker. Some had better endurance, some had better technique. We didn't really compare ourselves to each other. We just focused on doing the job well." "But you're not on Earth," pointed out gently. "And humans aren't part of the normal distribution here. You're an outlier in ways that most species never encounter." "So what do you want me to do?" asked. "Should I work slower, hold back more?" Had been thinking about this question since the students first raised their concerns. The easy answer was yes, ask to work slower, to blend in better. But that felt wrong somehow. He was supposed to be training freight handlers, not teaching people how to pretend to be less capable than they were. "No," said finally. "I don't want you to hold back. I want you to be excellent at what you do. That's what this academy is for. But I need you to help me figure out how to make this work for everyone." Nodded slowly. "What if I help the other students more? Not doing their work for them, but coaching them, helping them improve their technique. Would that help?" It was a simple suggestion, but it sparked an idea in his mind. Maybe the problem wasn't that was too different. Maybe the problem was that was still trying to treat him the same as everyone else. "Let me think about this," said. "For now, continue as you have been. And thank you for being so understanding about all of this." After left, sat in his office for a long time thinking. He thought about his 60 years of teaching, his perfect safety record, his pride in maintaining galactic standards. He thought about the first rule he taught every class: lift only what you're able. The question had asked on the first,